From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Sarah Lancaster will discuss the new Grain Sorghum Production System that's now been approved for you growers, featuring the igrowth hybrid resistant to Imiflex herbicide. She'll talk about how this new herbicide technology has performed in independent K-State field trials on an assortment of troublesome, grassy, and broadleaf weeds. Also today, K-State's Rich Llewlyn and Reid announced that the updated version of K-State's ARC PLC Tradeoff Spreadsheet is now available to you crop producers for comparing the likely payoffs from those two farm program options. And of course, K-State's Charlie Lee will be in for this week's wildlife segment. All that and more here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Thanks for listening in once again. This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're tuned to Agriculture Today. Right here, first off, we want to cover a development which was announced late in 2020 of immense importance to you grain sorghum producers who've been looking for answers to challenging weed problems for time unending, it seems. Joining us once again is weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Sarah Lancaster, to talk about the ins and outs of this new grain sorghum production system and the approval, Sarah, of a herbicide to which certain grain sorghum hybrids are resistant. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Eric, we've been talking off and on since the summer, right, you and I, about igrowth, grain sorghum, and Imiflex herbicide. So it is an exciting development because it is a fully commercialized herbicide-resistant grain sorghum. I want to kind of take a step back real quick, though, and just say it's an exciting development, but it is not going to be a silver bullet. You know, I was actually just talking about this with someone else this morning, that it's going to be a help for some specific grasses that we might have problems controlling, but it is an ALS-inhibiting herbicide, Imiflex is. And so there are a lot of concerns about existing herbicide resistance and also managing this technology so that we don't spread herbicide resistance unnecessarily.
We want to get into that in further detail here as we go along, but about the technology itself and the chemistry, its effectiveness, so forth.
So, yeah, we're pretty excited about what this technology can do in terms specifically of grass control and grain sorghum. So, Imiflex herbicide is a new formulation of a herbicide. The chemical name is a Mazamox. And so folks are probably familiar with that as Beyond or Raptor and some other systems. And so it's going to perform similarly. And eventually, UPL is even planning to label Imiflex for some of these other crops or promote Imiflex for some of these other crops. So they actually already have the label for them. They're just not necessarily marketing in that direction yet.
And when you say other crops, soybeans, potentially alfalfa? As well?
Soybeans, alfalfa would be some of the key ones that might impact Kansas, as well as things like dry beans and peas. You know, we do have a few acres of those crops in the northwestern part of the state. So, yeah, could be an interesting tool for folks.
You mentioned earlier on that grassy weed control will be one facet of this system, specifically a couple of species which are problematic year by year.
Right. So we've got pretty good data on crabgrass control and control of various foxtails in some of these systems. And it looks like it's going to do pretty well. There's some data that came out of southwest Kansas that I actually shared with folks in a previous e-update on this subject. And it looks like Imiflex is going to do a good job, especially maybe pre-emergence on some of those grassy weed species. And so the reason I emphasize the timing on this, Eric, Not only do we want to be just generally careful about not overusing herbicides with one particular mode of action, but specifically with regard to Imiflex, the label states that growers can only use it once per season. So it's going to be important that growers identify that timing that's going to give them the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, that's going to be most effective.
Will that be producer by producer, or have we any level of recommendations along that yet?
Eric, I've seen some data, but not enough that I feel comfortable saying, statewide, this is what folks should do. It's going to depend a little bit on the specific weed species. It's going to depend a little bit on the environment, when we get the rains, when we don't, if it's been a dry spring, if it's been a wet spring. All of those things that we take into consideration every year. But I think folks will see some differences, and there are some indications that some of this grass control will be better in the pre-slot than in the post timing.
What about broadleaf weed control? What can this chemistry do there?
Imazamox is able to control some of our key weeds, right? So in western Kansas, our key weeds are palmer amaranth and kochia, right? Depending kind of on where you are and what your specific situation is, one or the other or both of those species. So the thing that makes those species so difficult to control is that very often biotypes will have multiple herbicide resistance. So they'll be resistant to more than one type of herbicides, and very often one of those types of herbicides that they're resistant to are ALS-inhibiting herbicides, and Imazamox is an ALS-inhibiting herbicide. So assuming you have a susceptible population, you could see some help with your kochia and your palmer amaranth or other pigweed species, but ALS resistance is pretty widespread. So we need to kind of plan on good foundational pre-emergence products, get some atrazine done early, maybe something like a metolachlor or an acetochlor, and then be prepared to come back with a post-emergent application. Do not plan on Imiflex being your silver bullet for those really problematic weeds.
But if there are broadleaf species not resistant to the herbicide, the effectiveness can be pretty high, you say?
Yeah, it could be a good product for those particular crops, especially when targeted at smaller pigweeds in particular.
This could be a candidate, this formulation, in a tank mix scenario?
Absolutely, Eric. Again, we talk about managing herbicide resistance, and tank mixing is important for that. There are a couple of things that folks should think about, though, when they think about what not to tank mix Imiflex with. So some of those things include not tank mixing with crop oil and dicamba or 2,4-D. So 2,4-D or dicamba can be pretty common post-emergent applications for grain sorghum. We do know to expect some level of injury with those products in general, but applying Imiflex with those products and using a crop oil could lead to maybe more crop injury than folks might be comfortable with.
So another surfactant might be appropriate
there.
So
NIS would be more appropriate. So applications of Imiflex need both either crop oil or NIS, as well as some sort of nitrogen fertilizer. So typically that would be AMS or UAN.
There are stipulations on crop rotation intervals that must be discussed here, Sarah.
That's right. So I've said this a few times, Eric, but Imiflex is an ALS-inhibiting herbicide.
That's right. I want to get that across.
We often associate those types of products with a little longer rotation intervals for some crops. So one of the ways around these rotation intervals would be to utilize clearfield crops. So if a person has access to clearfield wheat or clearfield corn or clearfield canola, those rotation intervals are greatly reduced. But yeah, just to kind of run down some of those rotation intervals, Eric, we have 3 months to wheat that is not clearfield wheat, 8.5 months to corn that is not clearfield corn, 9 months to cotton or sunflower, 18 months to grain sorghum that is not igrowth, so that could have some implications for potential replant scenarios. So folks need to just remember that if they've already made their application of Imiflex and they have a replant situation. And then 18 to 26 months, depending on where you are in the state, for non-clearfield canola. So canola is really sensitive to a lot of ALS-inhibiting herbicides, and that's reflected in that longer rotation interval there.
And you certainly want producers to be aware of those restrictions, because that will obviously factor into their rotation planning for the longer term then.
Absolutely. So just long-term rotation planning, and then again, any sort of replant scenarios, or if you want to come back with other crops. So, yep.
And there is one other stipulation: planting igrowth hybrids year upon year continuously, that's a no-go, you say.
That's right. So back-to-back years of igrowth sorghum is prohibited by the label. And again, that has so much to do with managing herbicide resistance in these systems. The other thing that we should say when we're talking about this, we mentioned when we were talking about grass control, we talked about crabgrass and foxtail. I notably did not mention shattercane and Johnson grass, right? So those would be two of our key weed species in grain sorghum because they're so closely related, right? They're difficult to control. They are particularly competitive. However, due to resistance management concerns, those two weed species are specifically not listed on the label for Imiflex herbicide. So something to think about. The other thing along those lines as we think about product stewardship is that if you have Johnson grass or shattercane that are resistant to ALS inhibiting herbicides, igrowth is probably not the system for you. Like we said at the beginning, Eric, igrowth is an exciting technology. Not a silver bullet, but it is an exciting technology, and we want to do what we can to take care of it and promote its use wisely.
And so you want producers to garner as much information about this technology, the hybrid and the herbicide, and all of these requirements that go into the system beforehand, and consider all angles before they commit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has a lot of potential in a lot of situations, but not every situation.
By the way, all of what we've discussed here and more on this new Imiflex herbicide to be applied to the igrowth grain sorghum hybrids can be found in a brand new article in the Agronomy E-Update newsletter series, and that was posted this past week. Go to agronomy.ksu.edu to have a full look. Sarah, it is exciting, and we'll see how this plays into our grain sorghum production here in Kansas, for sure. Thanks for going over all of this with us.
Thanks, Eric.
She's a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Sarah Lancaster. We'll be back with more for you on this Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. And crop producers, K-State Agricultural Economics has now made available to you, once again, an updated version of its online tool that you can use to make estimates on the ARC and PLC payment levels for your production potentially, ARC being agricultural risk coverage and PLC being price loss coverage. Along with us now from the Agricultural Economics Department, Robin Reid and Rich Llewlyn. Robin, this is something that you try to keep updated year by year, right?
Yeah, this is what we call our trade-off spreadsheet, and we've been doing this back to the 2014 Farm Bill. So we released this in an updated format for the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's been used nationally. So we were able to get the updated Farm Service Agency data, so we have the correct benchmarks for the 2021 marketing year, and just released the tool for producers to look at their farm-specific economics.
Now, producers can choose year by year whether they want to stay with one or switch to the other option.
Correct. And really, the confusion here that I want to make sure people understand is that they're making this decision by March 15th of this year, but the marketing year, which sets the marketing year average price, doesn't start yet. We're not in the marketing year that you're making this decision for. So for like our fall crops, we're not going to start that marketing year until September 1st of this year. For our wheat, that's going to be June 1st. So the high prices that we're seeing now, while I hope they carry through to the marketing year that this Farm Bill election will apply to, the prices we're seeing right now don't count in the marketing year that we are making this election for.
Rich is the numbers guy here, so how did you come up with the payment numbers plugged into this tool?
Well, we're trying to estimate for both the current marketing year to give people an idea of what they're going to have for their payment in this coming October for the crop harvested last year. And we're now trying to look ahead to that next year that Robin was talking about. So we use futures prices as well as a basis. We kind of have to make a guess or an assumption about what the basis will be for each crop. And then based on those futures prices and that basis estimate, we've come up with some projected prices. We also have some projections from some other sources, from USDA as well as FAPRI at the University of Missouri. And so for this current year, wheat seems to have a possibility of a PLC payment. The other crops don't. It looks like they'll probably have higher prices than what would allow for a PLC payment. Wheat currently with our current projection is looking at around 60 cents a bushel for a PLC payment to be received in October. And that's for the decision that was made last year for the second year of that farm program. But now the new decision coming up in March that Robin mentioned is for the 2021 and 2022 crop year. It will be for crops harvested in 2021, but the marketing year goes around into 2022. So like she said, for the summer crops, that starts in September and goes around to August of 2022. For wheat, it starts in June and goes around into May of 2022. So our projections for that show that wheat still seems to be leaning towards PLC. So folks that are making a decision on ARC versus PLC for wheat, it might lean towards PLC, but it'll be a smaller payment probably based on our estimates right now, only about 20 cents at this point. The other crops are not showing a PLC payment for that next marketing year, which is the decision they're making now. Although corn is the closest to the reference price, and so if the corn price were to drop in that following year, it would have to drop the least in order for it to generate a PLC payment.
Just for clarification, haven't heard ARC payments mentioned here at all.
And the reason for that is that those are based on these prices, but also based on the county yield. And we don't even know what the county yield is for this year, let alone for that next year. And so we're not making any kind of projection on that. Now, if you have an average yield, then based on these prices for both this year and next year, none of the summer crops would have an ARC payment either. But if you're fairly certain there's not going to be a PLC payment, which is certainly the case for soybeans, then probably ARC would be the choice for soybeans, maybe PLC for wheat, and then for corn and grain sorghum, it's more of a flip the coin type of situation.
Robin, then, as one would go to the spreadsheets, they can pin down the numbers for their individual counties. That's the uniqueness of this, among other things?
Yes, their individual counties and really their individual farm. And I'll tell you how that works. So Arc County, as Rich said, is based on an Olympic average of 5 years of county yield times the national price that sets the guarantee. So that's a county-level economic decision. PLC is just looking at the national price. The yield component is the farm's established yield with Farm Service Agency, so that doesn't change year to year, but that's a farm-specific number. So the higher yield you have established with Farm Service Agency, the higher PLC payments that you're going to receive if, in fact, the marketing year average price triggers a payment. So what this tool does is basically shows a table, and at different marketing year prices, there's a whole range of marketing year prices, so there's uncertainty around what that's going to come in to be. But looking at the table, you can see a higher marketing year average price, what the PLC and Arc County payments would be, down to a very low marketing year average price. So obviously, at our reference price, let's say $5.50 for wheat, we'll start getting PLC payments as we have prices fall below $5.50 for that marketing year average. The biggest part of the table is Arc County. If we have an average county yield such as Rich described, we actually will not start seeing Arc County payments until we get a marketing year average down to $4.67. And that, again, there's some differences there on the individual farm level based on their established yield with FSA. But if you have a low yield on the county level, you're going to see payments a lot quicker in the Ark County program. So the table illustrates that. And conversely, if you have a higher county yield than what that benchmark average is, there's basically no chance of an Ark County payment. So really it illustrates just how sensitive the Ark County program is to what that county yield comes in to be, and then how that corresponds to what the PLC payment could be at that marketing or average price level.
Then, for purposes of illustration, select a county in Kansas and what those likely payments or payment levels would be at a given price.
So I'm going to do an example here for Republic County corn, non-irrigated corn. So they have an Olympic average county yield of 144 bushels. So you multiply that by 370, the national Olympic average, to set the price guarantee. So they're going to have a guaranteed revenue of $458 per acre for their corn. So we'll start seeing an Ark County payment if revenue goes below $458. On the PLC side, I'm going to assume a program yield of about 130 bushels, and then the reference price there is also $370. So if we get a marketing or average price at $370 below, obviously we're going to see a PLC payment. If it's above, we won't. With Ark County, if we have an average county yield of 144 bushels, we're not going to see an Ark County payment until the marketing year average price gets below $315. And again, there's that 86% factor in there, or 14% deductible, is why we don't start seeing Ark County payments right away. It's kind of, you think of it as a revenue-based product where there is a deductible. But if we have a lower county yield, say we have a loss in Republic County next year, the county yield comes in, let's say 105 bushels an acre, we're actually going to get an Ark County payment at a pretty high price. Say at $4 corn, we would be getting about a $37 per acre Ark County payment for our corn base. And just to clarify the numbers in the table, it is paid on 85% of the base acres you have in that commodity for both programs.
So we've thrown a lot of numbers out here, but if one, Rich, will go to the tool on the website, take a look at it, this will come quite clear. This is pretty user-friendly, all in all, in as far as making these comparisons.
It really is, and we've got some prices that you can use in the table to kind of use for comparisons and see where you think it might be and what the table's showing. The other thing to consider then is, what is your individual risk preference? Are you looking to guard against price declines and so looking more at price protection, or are you looking more at a revenue protection type situation, even with it being on the county level? And so that kind of comes down to the individual producer somewhat.
And lastly, all counties in Kansas and beyond, Robin.
Yes, all counties, all crops, and all irrigation types in the nation are in this tool if FSA has released data for it. I did notice there are some counties that are showing a non-irrigated guarantee but not a irrigated. There's probably some commodities that still need to have some data determined before they release it at the national level.
Producers, it's out there now and ready for your use. It is an Ark PLC Tradeoff Spreadsheet to help you along in making determinations on which farm program route to go there. And you can find it handily at agmanager.info. Rich and Robin, thanks for letting us know about it.
Thanks you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Over from Agricultural Economics here at Kansas State University, Rich Llewlyn and Robin Reid. We'll be back with more for you in a few moments. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
With a shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And now on to today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. Outgoing U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer is urging the Biden administration to keep tariffs on China as they do get results, he says. That's according to his comments made in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. Lighthizer said the Biden plan to bring other countries into the battle with China was a concern, saying that it could let other nations slow or veto U.S. actions and tie up the U.S. in endless, pointless discussions with China, in his words. The U.S. and China started dialogues back in the 1990s, he noted. That did nothing, he said, all of them just a waste of time. He still wants the Biden administration to keep tariffs on all $370 billion worth of Chinese goods, on 3/4 of everything China sells to the U.S., a 25% tariffs he slapped on Chinese car imports stopped China from potentially selling millions of vehicles here in the U.S., he said. Commenting on his replacement to head the trade office, Catherine Tai, Lighthizer said she helped garner Democrat support for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, that she learned good skills on the Hill, according to Lighthizer, including how to manage different people who have different objectives and still get things done. His stance of keeping a push on China, not surprising, and it has echoed comments since the election. Pilgrim's Pride Corporation has reached a $75 million settlement with a number of plaintiffs on an ongoing antitrust class action lawsuit filed in 2016. The company made that announcement in a filing in the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission yesterday, that agreement subject to court approval. The lawsuit was filed by Maple Vale Farms in 2016, alleging a number of large chicken-producing companies, including Pilgrim's Pride, Tyson, Koch Foods, and others, beginning at least in early January 2008, conspiring and combining to fix, raise, maintain, and stabilize the price of broilers, as that lawsuit read. The proposed settlement addresses the Maple Vale Farms case. However, Pilgrim's Pride and other companies have been sued by several other companies, including Boston Market. The lawsuits were filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. The Maple Vale Farms lawsuit alleges chicken companies cut production in order to drive up broiler prices. And getting the facts about genetically modified foods is a lot easier now, according to a local expert here at K-State, as Gary Crawford reports.
Want to start an argument? Just mention foods and the term GMO, genetically modified organism, or genetically engineered. Some consumers vehemently object to foods with GMO ingredients, even though
there's been no evidence that any of these food products have caused any kind of food safety issues.
And Kansas State University Extension food safety expert Karen Blixley says GMO foods have been around since 1994. Nonetheless,
there's a lot of misinformation about these food products and why they are out in the food system.
She says they are out there because GMO crops need fewer chemical applications, are more resistant to weather extremes, and can be made more nutritious. But she says these points seem to get lost in the misinformation being put out on social media. And so
we're trying to get that science-based information out there.
So the Food and Drug Administration has a website about bioengineered foods called Feed Your Mind. It explains the history of biotechnology, how the science works, and lots more. Just go online, search Feed Your Mind. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. On we go now to the weekly feature for you dairy producers, Milk Lines, and standing by, as always, with that, K-State dairy specialist, Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning maybe some coughing that they've been hearing in their calf barns. You know, this time of year we start getting some of those nice warm days in the afternoon, maybe up into the low 50s or mid 50s, but the nights are still cold. It drops down to maybe 20, 25 degrees at night. Keep in mind that even at 50 degrees, we're still outside the temperate zone for baby calves. Now, many of you probably have facilities where they can get into shelter, and many times those have a southern exposure, so it's nice that the calves are able to sun themselves during the afternoon when it's warmer, and they probably enjoy doing that. It also helps dry those barns out, keep the bedding a little bit drier. But how about at night? What's the situation in those barns? Well, number one, we need to have some really nice dry bedding there. The calves should never be able to get down to moisture. You need to keep those deep bedded in straw so the calves can actually nest. They need to probably have about 60% of their body surface actually touching straw. So they need to have enough straw there that they can burrow down. Again, as they burrow down, they need to make sure that they're not reaching moisture. Maybe it's been a while since you cleaned the barn, or maybe since you replaced the base underneath that straw. Clean base is a really, really important thing, and oftentimes that's missed on our farms, and as a result of that, animals come in contact with organisms that can cause them some issues. And if we can go in and clean the barn out, clean up the old base and replace it with 2 to 3 inches of either sand or ground limestone, we can start out with a very clean surface underneath, then put our straw on top of that. That actually helps break the disease cycle very well. Lastly, you need to think a little bit about whether or not the area is draft-free, particularly is it protected from winds that might come from the north or from the west. You need to make sure that there's still fresh air circulating in that barn. One of the things to check for in the morning is condensation along the roof line. See condensation, that's an indication that we still do not have enough fresh air circulating within that building. 3 final things that you need to check if you're having some issues with your younger calves is, number 1, the feeding program, making sure that they're getting enough nutrients. This is a place where the accelerated growth programs where we feed more milk can really be of a benefit. For the calves that are a week or less of age, making sure that we check serum proteins to make sure that we're getting good colostrum into the calves and we're getting passive transfer is also very important. And then one final thing to note as you look at the calves as they start to reach that 6 to 7 week old age, when will we start our vaccination program? This is a very interesting discussion that you should have with your herd veterinarian. Have him review what you've been doing and whether or not there's something you need to change to maybe make your calves a little less susceptible to some of the respiratory diseases that we see at this time of year. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And a quick reminder here, the next in the series of K-State beef calving schools is set for tomorrow in Marshall County, Blue Rapids to be precise. You producers in north central northeast Kansas, you've a short time now to reserve your spot at this school. Contact the Marshall County Extension Office to do so right away. This is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today returns now. Once more, we welcome in former wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. Charlie, today, something along the lines of hunting and fishing safety around iced-over waters, rivers, streams, ponds, and there's been some new research on that topic, you say.
Yes, each year we find tragedies occur in Kansas because of people falling into the water, either in summer drownings from boats, or from the shore, or in winter from duck hunting, or ice fishing, or just children playing on the ice. There's been some estimates, though, United States-wide, that can be over 10 per day during the winter time frame. Many of those can probably be prevented with improved education. But recently there was a study conducted. The results were presented in an online journal that showed falling through the ice is one of the major risk factors associated with winter ice activities, which results in fatal and non-fatal winter drownings. Globally, drowning is the third leading cause of unintentional injury deaths, and in northern countries, approximately 20% of the fatal drownings in natural water occur in winter, when the inland waters are typically frozen. Winter drownings are particularly hazardous because you have the cold shock and incapacitation that can lead to rapid unconsciousness, cardiac problems, and death. You also have non-fatal drownings where you have respiratory impairment from drowning that does not result in death that occur at least as often as fatal drownings, which carry kind of the same substantial emotional, social, and economic costs because of the high likelihood of brain damage from submersion for longer periods of time in the water. There's a lot of interpretation in trying to define the complex nature of the climate factors that are involved so that you can predict the safety on ice. Over the past century, we know that lakes, rivers, and seas are experiencing earlier ice breakup, later ice formation, and shorter seasons of ice cover. There's been decreases in ice thickness and increases in the frequency of freeze-thaw events, and in some winters here in Kansas, we may not get ice cover to form at all. With warmer winters, we get ice cover is becoming more unpredictable, and we could probably expect increasing number of drownings to occur during winter if these climate trends continue.
Now, this study was rather comprehensive in looking at the varying strengths of ice, if you will, and these drowning incidents that accompany it globally, basically, right?
Yes, this was a study that was done globally with 10 countries. Canada was a country that seemed to have the highest number of winter drownings of all 10 countries that were analyzed. The locations in the United States that were studied include those in the most northern part, including Alaska, Connecticut, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana, New Hampshire, New York, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. I thought it was kind of interesting to note that in places like Germany and Italy, where they have strong regulations about who can go on the ice and for what activities, that the drownings occurred at lower rates. Does that mean that in some of those countries the regulation is being very effective and people are following those general guidelines and those regulations to stay off the water? It's been my experience here in Kansas that sometimes some people are not very good at following regulations or suggestions of things that they can do to reduce the risks that they may experience in the outdoors.
So what would you suggest otherwise then if regulatory changes are not in order? Simply an awareness of conditions and just how strong that ice might be?
Well, that's certainly important to don't go out on the ice if it's not thick enough. And if you're unsure of the ice thickness, then it's better to stay off of it. That's pretty simple. But realizing that people want perhaps more stringent guidelines than that or suggestions, generally suggest 4 inches of ice for standing, skating, and ice fishing. Snowmobiles, they're going to require at least 5 inches of ice, and there are times that it takes more than 12 inches of ice to support a medium-sized vehicle. There's also some other factors associated with ice. Color. Clear ice is at least twice as strong as ice that's snow, or called white ice. The ice that's closer to the shoreline is weaker than the ice that's further out. Ice that's near a river outlet and inlets or around springs on ponds is going to be weaker. When you have obstructions like trees or plants, vegetation that's sticking up through the ice, that's going to weaken the surrounding ice. We know that water currents can cause cracks and holes and weak spots. And then we have snow. Snow hides what's underneath and can weaken that ice. So if the ice is snow-covered, it's best to dig some test holes to measure ice thickness in several locations with an ice auger and make sure that it's at least 4 inches thick and solid before going out on it.
It's as simple as not taking undue risks here to avoid these tragedies. And as you said earlier, if there's any doubt, simply stay off the ice.
Yeah, don't go out on the water alone. Make sure you know the conditions of the ice. And by practicing these techniques, you can possibly save yourself and others from great bodily harm.
We have quite a bit of winter to go, so that's good information to share with folks about taking precautions when hunting or fishing or conducting other activity on or around ice, and understand that ice may not be as solid as you might think. Charlie, appreciate you passing that along. Longtime wildlife specialist Charlie Lee, K-State Research and Extension, with us. Rounding out this Tuesday edition, which can be heard in podcast form, along with other previous broadcasts at agtoday.net, while they're subscribed to the automatic download of the program to your mobile device. agtoday.net is where to look into that. Meantime, please be back with us right here tomorrow, won't you? Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.